I stood alone in the parking lot of a convenience store, the buzzing sign above flickering intermittently. The lot was almost empty, save for an old truck idling at the pumps. The red taillights of Damon's car had vanished into the night, swallowed up by the endless road ahead. It wasn't just the physical distance between us that struck me. It was the emotional one that stretched out far beyond what I could reach. I should have been panicking. 400 kilometers from home, stranded in the middle of nowhere. I had no car, no way to get back. But I wasn't panicking. I should have been terrified, but instead, a strange calm began to settle over me. The laughter from the car still echoed in my head. Damon's laugh, joined by Leia's, mocking me, the sharpness of their voices cutting through the air like knives. They hadn't even tried to hide their amusement. I could still hear it now. I clenched my purse, my knuckles turning white. My heart should have been racing, but instead, it felt as if the world had muted itself, as if I were floating above it all, detached from the harsh reality of what had just happened. I let out a breath, steadying myself. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd felt this, still. I should have felt something more than this numbness. Panic, anger, a scream, anything. But no, instead, I felt relief. I thought back to earlier that day. Marco Whitmore's smug face, his smirk as he made fun of the way I packed my suitcase. Looks like someone's heading to a funeral, he'd said. Leia's laugh had followed, the sound so loud and sharp, it was like a slap across my face. And Damon, my own son, joining in. He had to. He had to prove to them that he belonged. I could see it all in my mind, like a movie reel that wouldn't stop. My smile, the one I'd forced on my face, felt wrong. A reflex. I had always smiled when things got uncomfortable. But that smile felt like it was choking me, burning my throat. My phone buzzed in my purse. I took a breath and pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was Damon. "Lighten up, Mom. It's just a joke." The words blurred for a second. My chest tightened as I read them again. Slowly, almost trying to convince myself they were real. A joke. That's all I was to him now. Just something to laugh at, something to be ridiculed. I looked up at the highway, the darkness stretching endlessly ahead of me. The sound of their laughter still lingered in my ears, though they were miles away now. I hadn't been enough. Not for Damon. Not for Leia. I had swallowed my pride for years, told myself it was easier to stay quiet. It was easier to let them laugh. But tonight, something had changed. As I tucked my phone back into my purse, a thought pressed against my mind. Quiet but undeniable. This wasn't the end of me. Maybe it was the beginning. I was 19 when it all changed. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. The phone call that turned my world upside down. The sound of the officer's voice, too calm, too formal. It wasn't just the news of Frank's accident. It was the way everything seemed to collapse in on me, one piece at a time. One moment, I was a young wife, planning for a future with the man I loved. The next, I was a widow, holding my baby boy in my arms and wondering how in the world I was supposed to keep us going. I had to make do. There was no other choice. I worked nights at the diner, pulling double shifts to pay the bills. In the mornings, I cleaned offices, sweeping up the messes others left behind. I sewed alterations for neighbors when I could, and some weeks, I skipped meals so Damon could have seconds. It wasn't easy, but it had to be done. Damon was still small then, barely 2 years old, but his tiny hands would clutch mine as I came home from those long nights. He'd kiss my cheek, tired but eager to show me he was happy to see me. I held on to those moments, to his soft little voice that promised me, "One day, I'll take care of you, Mom." At the time, I believed him. I kept going because I had to, but also because I wanted to. Those words, simple as they were, kept me moving. I wasn't just working for survival. I was working for him. And I kept telling myself that one day, all of this, sacrificing everything, exhausting myself, would be worth it. But somewhere along the way, Damon changed. It started when he was a teenager. The first time I noticed it, he was laughing at something one of his friends had said, and I couldn't help but smile. He had this light in his eyes, the same one I remembered from when he was little, the one that made me believe everything would be okay. But then I saw the way he looked at me. It was different, colder. He was no longer my little boy who promised to take care of me. He was growing up, and I wasn't sure where I fit anymore. By the time he was 18, I was no longer the person he turned to when life got tough. The jokes I used to laugh off now felt like small knives, sharp and quiet. At first, it was just the little things. His friends would make fun of my accent or the way I dressed, and Damon would laugh along with them. He said it was no big deal, but I could see the way he leaned in, how he tried to blend in with them, to be part of their world. It hurt, but I told myself it was just a phase. I had to let him go. He was growing up, becoming his own person. But as the years went by, I watched him drift farther away. And then when he married Leia, it was like he was a different person altogether. Her family was everything mine wasn't. They had money, status, confidence that I had never known. The first time I met them, I felt like an outsider. I was kept at the edge of every conversation, the one in the background, watching as Damon smiled and laughed with them. At first, it was nervous laughter. He didn't know how to fit in, but he tried. He wanted to. And slowly, I saw that laughter become real. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that things would go back to normal, that my son still loved me. But every time they mocked me, my thrift store dresses, my quiet manners, I could see the way Damon's smile grew wider, more relaxed, and the ache in my chest deepened. He was happy with them. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't enough. I had poured everything into him. Every ounce of my energy, my love, my sacrifice. I had given him everything I had. And now, here he was, choosing their world over mine. It wasn't a moment, but a slow erosion. Each laugh at my expense, each joke he joined in on, chipped away at what we had. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that I was losing him. I tried not to think about it. I told myself he was still my son, that the boy who promised to take care of me was still there, buried beneath this new man. But as time went on, I began to wonder if that boy had ever really been there at all. The first time I met Leia's family, I could feel the difference. From the moment we stepped into their house, I could tell I wasn't like them. It wasn't just the fancy furniture or the polished smiles. It was the way they spoke, the way they moved. Everything about them screamed wealth, privilege, a life I had never known, never even dreamed of. And there I was, standing at the edge of it all, too aware of the thrift store dress I'd picked out that morning. The one I thought looked nice enough, but now felt too plain, too out of place. Leia's father, tall and immaculate in his tailored suit, extended a hand that seemed as stiff as his smile. "Evelina, how lovely to meet you," he said, his voice smooth, measured. But the way his eyes flickered over me, over my hair, my clothes, made me feel like I was nothing more than a curiosity, a specimen. I forced a smile, shaking his hand. "It's nice to meet you too, Mr. Whitmore." Damon stood beside me, looking almost lost in the crowd of people who clearly belonged here. He smiled at me, that reassuring smile he had always given when things felt uncomfortable. But even that smile felt different now. His eyes weren't filled with the warmth they used to hold. They were colder, distracted. Dinner was an ordeal. I sat at the edge of the table as Leia's family exchanged conversation about their latest vacations, business dealings, and who had the best private jet. I tried to keep up, tried to engage, but every word I spoke felt like it was falling into an abyss. Leia's brother, Marco, took one look at my southern drawl and made a comment about it, his voice dripping with mockery. "You sure you're not in the wrong place? If Evelina," he'd asked, grinning like it was all a joke. Laughter followed, and Damon, my own son, laughed with them. I thought maybe he didn't hear me, but when I looked over at him, I saw the faintest smile on his lips, the kind that said, "I'm just going along with it." His laugh, once full of warmth when he was younger, now seemed hollow, like it had been pulled from him to fit in. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to smile. It was easier than confronting the truth. This wasn't just a joke. This wasn't just teasing. This was him distancing himself from me, his mother, to make room for them. For the next few months, I saw the change slowly creep in. Every time we met, I could feel it. His eyes would linger on me for just a second too long, then quickly dart away. When we sat together at dinner, he'd sometimes sit just a little farther away, laughing with Leia and her family, never quite looking at me the way he used to. I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal. He was just becoming an adult. He had his own life now. But every time I caught that look, when his face shifted just slightly, when his smile turned into something forced, it hurt. It hurt in a way I couldn't explain. Damon wasn't just laughing with them anymore. He was becoming one of them. And I was being pushed further and further into the shadows until I barely existed in his world. I was losing him. Slowly, quietly, like sand slipping through my fingers. It wasn't just the laughter. It wasn't just the way he joined in with their jokes. It was the way he started to change his voice, the way he dressed, the way he held himself around them. And each time I tried to hold on, to remind him of who I was, of who we were, it was like I was invisible. Love, I thought. This is what love looks like. Endurance, sacrifice. But I began to wonder, did love require this much silence? Did it require this much humiliation? Was it worth it just to be near him? I couldn't tell anymore. I couldn't tell if love was worth the price of losing myself. We were on the road, driving to some weekend getaway, when the first comment hit. I had packed what I thought was a practical, sensible suitcase. A couple of blouses, a cardigan, and some comfortable pants. But when Leia's brother, Marco, looked over at my bag, he grinned like he had just discovered some hidden treasure. "Well, looks like you packed for a funeral, not a vacation," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I froze. Damon glanced at me, his eyes quickly darting away, his lips tight. A small laugh escaped him, barely audible. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I looked out the window, the trees flashing by. I didn't say anything. It wasn't the first time they'd mocked me, but it still hurt in a way I didn't know how to explain. Leia's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Did you bring anything other than the basics? A snack, maybe? We'll need something to munch on during the drive." I reached for the small bag of trail mix I had made before we left. Damon used to love it when he was younger, and I thought maybe he still would. I handed it forward, trying to ignore the lump in my throat. Leia's mom wrinkled her nose as she glanced at it. "Of course, she brings bird food," she said with a laugh. They all laughed. Marco, Leia, her brothers, and even Damon chuckled along. It wasn't funny. It wasn't funny at all. But I smiled, the smile coming out stiff, forced. I thought I could make it stop if I just smiled, if I just endured the sting like I had done so many times before. I felt it then, the coldness creeping in. I wasn't just the target of their jokes anymore. I was the invisible one, the one they could poke fun at without fear of backlash. And Damon? He had joined them. Not just once, but time and time again. His laughter, once a sound I cherished, now felt like a betrayal. When I cleared my throat to speak, trying to change the subject, Leia leaned forward, her voice a whisper, but loud enough for me to hear. "There she goes again with that librarian cough." It was like a slap to the face. They giggled, their laughter filling the car, and I shrank back into my seat. I felt small. I felt ridiculous. And Damon, my son, he was part of it. He was part of their world now, not mine. For a moment, I considered saying something, standing up for myself, but the words stuck in my throat, like they always did. The silence stretched on, the tension in the air thickening. I didn't speak up. I couldn't. What good would it do? I already knew the answer. When we finally pulled into the convenience store to fuel up, I noticed Damon leaning in close to Leia's brothers, their shoulders hunched together, their heads tilted toward me. I didn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew the rhythm of their laughter. Then I caught one sentence, low but clear. "This will be epic." My heart stopped. I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew what they were planning. I knew that I wasn't just the subject of their jokes anymore. I was the joke itself. I had become the punchline, the thing they could ridicule without consequence. Damon didn't even look at me when he stood up to go inside the store with them. He didn't notice my hands trembling in my lap or the way my chest tightened. They were all laughing together now. And I was standing on the outside, looking in. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I wasn't even a part of my son's world. I swallowed the bile that rose in my throat. I had been trying to protect myself by staying quiet, by pretending I could take it. but all I was doing was letting them push me farther away. My silence hadn't protected me. It had given them permission to keep mocking me. As I stood there, watching them walk inside, I felt the weight of it. This wasn't just a joke anymore. This was my son, choosing them, choosing their world over me. I wasn't part of their world. I wasn't even visible to them. I watched them drive off, the red taillights shrinking into the night until they disappeared completely. The hum of the fluorescent lights above me seemed louder now, almost mocking in its stillness. I stood frozen in the parking lot, my hands trembling at my sides. The sound of the engine fading away felt like a door closing, one I hadn't known was there until it slammed shut. For a moment, I thought maybe I had just imagined it. Maybe Damon and Leia would turn around any second, realize I wasn't with them, and come back to get me. But the minutes passed, and no car pulled back into the lot. I looked down at my phone, buzzing softly in my purse. When I pulled it out, there was a message from Damon. "Lighten up, Mom. It's just a joke. Don't be so dramatic." The words blurred for a second, and I swallowed hard, as if the lump in my throat could make them disappear. I read it again, slowly, trying to wrap my mind around it. A joke. This was the way he saw me now. This was what I had become in his eyes, just the punchline of a cruel joke. I hadn't expected it to hurt this much, but it did. The sting wasn't just the abandonment. It was the realization that this wasn't the first time they had treated me this way. Not the first time I had been left behind. Not the first time I had been ignored, mocked, or dismissed. And each time, I had told myself it was just a mistake, a misunderstanding. But tonight, this felt like the truth. I looked around the empty lot, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. Alone, truly alone. Not just in the physical sense, but emotionally. Damon was gone. His laughter still echoed in my head, but it wasn't a sound I wanted to hear anymore. I gripped my purse tighter, my fingers curling around the straps, and for the first time, I didn't feel scared. I felt something else. I felt angry. I thought about the small stash of money I had saved over the years, hidden away in the inner pocket of my wallet. I had never told anyone about it. Not Damon, not Leia, not anyone. Just a few dollars here and there. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to get me away from this. Enough to take control of something, anything. It was a small amount, but it was mine. And that made it worth something. I counted the bills, steadying my hands as I did. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for a bus ticket. It would be enough to get me out of here, away from the place where I was nothing more than a joke. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "Ma'am, you need a lift somewhere? It's a rough stretch out here." I turned to find a man standing by the pumps, an older guy with kind eyes. His weathered face looked familiar in a way that made me think I could trust him. For a moment, I almost said yes. Almost. But then I realized something. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone else to take care of me. Not anymore. "No, thank you," I said, my voice steady, stronger than I had expected it to be. "I'll manage." He nodded, as if he understood more than I had spoken. He didn't push, just smiled and turned back to his truck. I felt something inside me shift, like a heavy weight lifting. For the first time, I wasn't depending on someone else to fix my life. I wasn't waiting for Damon to come back, or for anyone else to recognize my worth. I had what I needed, and that was enough. I stood taller as I slipped the bills back into my purse. My shoulders straightened. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. I was going to define it. The bus would be here soon. And when it came, I would step onto it with my head held high, leaving this place and everything that came with it behind me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to go alone. I wasn't afraid to walk away. The night air was still heavy with the scent of gasoline, but it wasn't the only thing in the air now. Something else, something new, seemed to fill the space around me. As I stood there watching the dim glow of the convenience store lights flicker, a car slowed down by the pumps and a man leaned out of the window. "You need a lift somewhere, ma'am." His voice was rough but kind, his face weathered by age and time, the kind of face you saw in small towns, like a man who had lived a long life but hadn't let it harden him. I looked at him for a moment, uncertain. The sudden offer of help, especially from a stranger, felt like it was coming from a place of care. It was tempting to say yes, to allow someone else to carry the weight for a little while. But then I felt it, this quiet pull inside me, a force that had been growing for hours, maybe days, that was now pushing me in a new direction. I didn't need saving. I had never needed saving. I smiled at the man, soft but firm. "No, thank you," I said, my voice steady. "I'll manage." The words felt good. They felt like armor. Not the kind that shielded me from the world, but the kind that reminded me I was capable of handling whatever came my way. The man gave me a slow nod, as if he understood. He didn't push. He just tipped his hat and drove off, leaving me standing there alone, but not quite the same. For the first time, I wasn't looking for someone to come in and fix things for me. I didn't need a ride, a rescuer, or someone to tell me it was going to be okay. I already knew it was. I was okay. I had the money I needed, I had a plan, and I had something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: confidence. I had everything I needed within me. It was as though the weight of years of dependence on Damon, on everyone around me, had just dropped away. The road stretched out in front of me, not as something to fear, but as something to walk down with my head held high. I didn't need a hand to guide me, no longer waiting for someone else to validate my worth or show me the way. I had the courage to take the first step on my own. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small or lost or invisible. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The bus would be here soon, and I didn't know exactly where it would take me. But I wasn't afraid. The choice was mine now, and that made all the difference. As I walked to the bench to wait, I felt a strange lightness in my chest, a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a dramatic moment of triumph. It wasn't loud or grand, but it was mine. I was taking control. I wasn't waiting for someone else to make the next move. I had already made it. The world felt wide open in front of me, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I could face whatever came next. On my own. I sat on the bench outside the convenience store, the night air still cool against my skin, my phone clutched tightly in my hands. I stared at the screen for a few moments, uncertain. It felt almost strange to reach out after everything. But there was someone I knew who might understand. Someone who had always been there, even when I hadn't leaned on her enough. I scrolled through my contacts and found her number. Marjorie, my cousin. I hesitated for a second. What if I was interrupting her life? What if she didn't want to hear from me? But then I thought about how much I had been holding inside for so long. And suddenly, I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't judge me. I tapped her name and hit dial. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Evelina? Is everything okay?" Her voice was warm, steady, the kind of voice that made me feel like I could breathe again. I paused, trying to find the words. "I don't know where else to go, Marjorie. I'm lost. I don't know what to do anymore." There was a silence on the other end, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just a moment of understanding. Then Marjorie spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You don't have to explain, Eve. I've got you. My guest room is yours for as long as you need it. You know that, right?" Tears welled up in my eyes. Unexpected, but welcome. I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone to offer me a safe place, to tell me that I wasn't alone. I don't know what to say. I don't have anywhere else to go. My voice cracked, and I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You have me," she said, her voice unwavering. "Always." The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. For so long, I had carried the weight of everything. Damon's rejection, Leia's mockery, the feeling of being invisible. But now, in this moment, with Marjorie's words, something inside me began to shift. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for years started to lift, just a little. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice steady for the first time that night. "I'll be there soon." After hanging up, I sat there for a while longer, letting the quiet settle around me. I knew this was the first step, the real first step, in reclaiming my life. I wasn't just running away from something. I was running toward something, toward healing, toward family, toward rediscovering who I was outside of the roles I had been forced to play. I pulled my purse closer and checked the time. The bus was scheduled to arrive in an hour. For the first time in months, I didn't feel a deep, gnawing fear. I felt calm, empowered even. When the bus pulled into the lot, I stood up and walked toward it, my steps more certain than they had been in a long time. As I climbed onto the bus and found my seat, I looked out the window at the dark road behind me. The headlights of the bus cut through the night, and for the first time in ages, I didn't feel lost in the dark. I was on my way to Savannah. I was on my way to start over. As the engine rumbled to life and the bus pulled away, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The journey was just beginning, but already I felt lighter. I wasn't alone anymore, and I didn't have to keep carrying all the pain, the isolation, the silence. For the first time in a long while, I could see the road ahead, and I was no longer afraid to walk it. The bus pulled into the station in Savannah just as the first light of dawn began to stretch across the sky. The air here was different, warmer, thicker with the smell of damp earth and salt. I stood for a moment, just taking it all in, as if I needed a moment to truly believe I was here. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but what I felt wasn't fear or uncertainty. It was something softer, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Marjorie's house was small, tucked between towering oak trees draped in Spanish moss. When she opened the door to greet me, there was no hesitation in her hug, no awkwardness. She simply wrapped her arms around me and pulled me into the warmth of her home. It was nothing grand, but it felt like everything I had been missing. The house smelled like lavender and home-cooked meals, and as I walked inside, I couldn't help but feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. This was my sanctuary. The walls were bare in places, but it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, inviting. It felt like a place where I could finally breathe. "I'm so glad you're here," Marjorie said, pulling away and giving me a smile that made me feel like I wasn't just welcomed, but wanted. "Thank you," I said quietly, unsure of what else to say. She led me to the guest room, and as I set my bags down, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by how different everything was. For the first time in so long, I felt like I was more than just a background character in my own life. A few days later, Marjorie nudged me toward therapy. At first, I resisted. I wasn't sure I was ready to dig up everything I had buried. But she kept pushing, reminding me that I deserved to feel better, that I didn't have to keep carrying all the pain by myself. When I first walked into the therapist's office, I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. The walls felt too close, too suffocating. But as the session went on, I realized something. There was no battle. I wasn't fighting against anyone else. I was fighting for myself. The therapist was patient, kind, and asked me questions that made me pause, reflect. For the first time, I was given the space to speak the truths I had never allowed myself to voice. I wasn't just talking about the past. I was beginning to understand it. The weight I had carried for so long was finally being lifted, not by someone else, but by me. At the same time, Marjorie suggested I join a library outreach program she was involved in. They were looking for volunteers to help organize donated books for children in rural schools. I didn't think I had much to offer. What did I know about organizing books? But Marjorie was persistent. She saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. The first day I went to the library, I felt out of place. The shelves were stacked high with books I hadn't touched in years. I felt like an outsider, but I pushed through, and slowly, the work began to feel familiar. The attention to detail, the careful planning, it all started to make sense. What surprised me the most was how respected I felt. My ability to stay organized, my meticulous nature, all the skills I had used to keep my life together for so long were finally being recognized. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just the woman who had sacrificed everything. I was someone with real value, someone with skills that mattered. Each day, I felt a little stronger, a little more like myself. I began to rediscover who I was outside of all the roles I had played for years. Mother, caretaker, silent observer. I was more than that now. I was rebuilding, and I was beginning to believe in myself again. Savannah had become my fresh start, a place where I could heal, work, and grow. And with each passing day, I could feel the old weight of neglect and self-doubt lifting. It wasn't going to happen overnight, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward. Finally, I was taking steps to reclaim my life. It had been 2 weeks since I left everything behind. 2 weeks of quiet, of finding my footing again in a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The noise of the world outside, the world I had once tried so hard to be a part of, had faded to a dull hum. But when I saw him standing just inside the library's glass doors, my heart skipped. Damon. His face was drawn, eyes tired, like he hadn't slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled, the kind of disheveled look you get when you've been carrying the weight of something heavy, but haven't yet figured out how to put it down. He looked different, smaller somehow, the confident facade he once wore cracked, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. He saw me before I had a chance to look away, and his footsteps were hesitant as he approached. "Mom," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. The word hung in the air between us, full of things unspoken. He took another step, looking lost. "Please, can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of him. My son, the boy I had once believed would take care of me. But as I looked at him now, I realized something that had been settling inside me for weeks. He wasn't the same person anymore. And I wasn't the same person either. I nodded toward the quiet corner where I often worked, the stillness a sharp contrast to the tension in the air. Damon followed me, his steps unsure, like he wasn't sure whether to approach or retreat. We sat down, the space between us heavy, filled with things I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, breaking the silence. His voice cracked, but there was no anger, no defensiveness. Just regret. I didn't mean for things to go the way they did. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at him. I had expected this moment to come, had almost prepared myself for it. But hearing it from him, after all this time, still stirred something in me. Not pain exactly, but something close, something I couldn't quite name. "You didn't just hurt me, Damon," I said finally, my voice steady calm. This wasn't something that happened in one moment. It wasn't just that night at the store. It was every joke, every laugh, every time you chose them over me. He looked down, shame flashing across his face, but I wasn't finished. "You think it was just a joke, don't you?" I said, my words measured, but firm. "You think you were just having fun." But that's not what it was. It was neglect, disguised as humor. It was the slow erosion of respect, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. "It's been years, Damon. Years of you choosing their world over mine." He flinched, the guilt too much to hide, but I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was simply telling the truth that had been buried inside me for so long. "I didn't know how to. I didn't think you'd really leave," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought you'd always forgive me. That's what you do, right? You always forgive." The word stung, but I didn't let them break me. I had already forgiven him. But forgiveness wasn't enough anymore. "I did forgive you," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. "I always did. But forgiveness without respect is not love, Damon. I'm not here to carry you through your mistakes anymore." His eyes welled with tears, but I didn't look away. I didn't reach for him. "You have to understand," I continued, the weight of everything finally lifting. "I've spent my life putting up with things because I thought that's what love was. I thought it was my job to absorb all the hurt, all the neglect, and just keep going. But love doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like swallowing every insult and pretending it doesn't matter. That's not love. It's silence. It's submission." He wiped at his eyes, shaking his head. "I thought you'd always forgive me. I didn't think you'd really leave." I stood up, straightening my shoulders. I didn't feel the anger I expected. I felt clarity. "I didn't leave to punish you," I said, my voice strong. "I left because I finally realized that I don't have to be a punching bag for your mistakes. You can change, Damon, but I won't be your shield anymore." His shoulders slumped, the fight gone from him. For the first time, I saw him as he truly was, a young man lost in his own choices, unsure of how to undo the damage. But that wasn't my burden to fix anymore. "I'm not leaving you, Damon," I said quietly. "I'm leaving the role you put me in. And you have a chance to rebuild yourself. But you'll do it without me." I turned and walked away, my heart steady in a way it hadn't been in years. Damon's silence followed me, but I knew it wasn't my job to fill it. It wasn't my job to carry the weight of his choices anymore. As I stepped outside, I felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to make things right. I was making them right for myself. It was a Tuesday when I saw Damon again. I had been organizing books at the library, lost in the familiar rhythm of sorting, labeling, and making sense of the chaos. But when I heard the soft creak of the door, I knew without looking that he was there. I didn't turn immediately, didn't rush to greet him like I used to. I knew why he was here, and I wasn't going to make this easy for either of us. He stood at the door for a moment, his shadow stretching across the floor, but I didn't look up. I didn't need to see him to know what he was going to say. He had been carrying the weight of his choices, but I had carried mine long enough. "I need to talk to you, Mom," he said, his voice softer than I remembered, quieter, like he didn't know how to start. I took a deep breath, finally looking at him. He was thinner than the last time I'd seen him, his eyes a little darker, haunted by something he hadn't been able to name. I set down the book I had been holding, my fingers lingering on the cover for just a moment before I met his gaze. "What do you need to say?" I asked, my voice steady, though the words tasted bitter in my mouth. Damon stepped forward, hands tucked into his pockets, his posture hesitant. He seemed lost, unsure of how to bridge the gap that had grown between us. "I've been thinking," he started, "about everything. About what happened. I'm sorry, Mom. I know I hurt you. I never meant to." The apology came, but it wasn't enough anymore. I had heard the words too many times, and I had swallowed them whole each time, hoping for change. But change wasn't just about saying the right things. It was about doing them. "You're sorry," I repeated, my voice low but firm. "You don't get to just be sorry, Damon. You don't get to say that and expect everything to go back to how it was." His eyes widened, and I could see the frustration building inside him. I know I can't fix everything right now, but I'm trying. I want to fix this, Mom. I need you." The words stung, but not in the way they once had. It wasn't the same kind of sting. It didn't feel like a wound opening up again. This time, it felt like a door closing, finally, for good. "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You don't need me, Damon. You need to fix yourself. I'm not here to clean up your messes anymore, and I'm not going to be your shield. I've spent my whole life thinking that's what love is. Enduring, sacrificing, taking the blows because that's what a mother does." I took a step back, steadying myself. "But that's not love, Damon. That's submission. And I'm not going to submit to this anymore. Not to you, not to anyone." He took a step forward, his face softening. "But I thought you'd always forgive me. I thought you'd always be there." I let out a breath, the weight of his words hitting me, but I didn't falter. This was the moment, the one I had been waiting for, without even realizing it. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to shrink anymore. "I forgave you, Damon," I said, my voice stronger now. "I forgave you every time you hurt me, every time you chose their laughter over my dignity. But forgiveness isn't enough. Respect is what matters. Respect is what I need, and that's what I've been asking for all along. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm asking for your respect." His face dropped, and for a moment I saw the boy I once knew, the one who promised to take care of me, the one who clung to me when he was little. But that boy wasn't here anymore. "I'm done being your emotional crutch, Damon," I continued, my voice steady, unwavering. "I'm done being your shield. You can rebuild yourself, but you'll do it without me as your safety net." I didn't expect him to understand fully. I didn't expect him to suddenly change. But I didn't need him to. I wasn't waiting for him to come around. I had waited long enough. "I'm not leaving you, Damon," I said, my words final. "I'm leaving the role you put me in." The silence between us felt heavy, but it wasn't a bad kind of heavy. It was the kind of weight that made you feel like you were finally standing on your own 2 feet, finally breathing without fear of being crushed. I turned toward the door, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the ache of longing. I didn't feel the need to fix everything. I just felt free. As I stepped into the sunlight, I knew that this was the last time I would carry the weight of his choices. I was finally free, and nothing was going to hold me back anymore. The apartment was small, tucked near the Savannah River, but it was mine. The walls were bare, waiting for me to make them my own. The morning light filtered in through the windows, casting soft shadows across the hardwood floors. I set my boxes down with a deep breath, feeling both relief and a strange kind of excitement. I had dreamed of this moment for so long, but now that it was real, I was unsure where to begin. The silence of the apartment was different from the loneliness I had felt before. It was a quiet I had chosen, not one imposed upon me. I didn't have to answer to anyone, didn't have to shrink myself to fit into anyone's world but my own. The first box I opened was full of books Damon had once laughed at. Novels I had loved, histories I'd devoured, poetry that had spoken to parts of me I hadn't known existed. When I pulled them from the box, I felt a pang of something close to pride, but not quite. It was more like a quiet victory. I placed them on the shelf, one by one. As I arranged them, I could almost hear Damon's voice, mocking the things I cared about. He would have called them boring, dull. But they weren't. They were mine, and they always had been. I moved on to the next box. This one held a small collection of canvases, some half-finished. Others I hadn't had the courage to start. I pulled out the first one and set it on the floor, facing the wall. The painting wasn't anything special, colors clashing, lines crooked, but it was a start. It was my start. I picked up the brush, hesitated for only a moment, and then dipped it into the paint. With each stroke, I could feel the weight of the past being lifted. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it didn't need to be. It was mine, imperfect and raw. As I stood back to look at it, I realized something. This was the first time I had painted for myself. Not for Damon, not for anyone else, but for me. And that was enough. The room felt fuller now, the silence filled with the sound of my own breathing, the gentle hum of the city outside. I looked around at the space I had created, at the life I was beginning to build, and I knew this was only the beginning. I walked to the window and looked out at the river, the water flowing gently by. The view was peaceful, but more than that, it was mine. The apartment, the books, the painting, they were all pieces of my identity, reclaimed and placed here where no one could take them from me. I had spent years living for someone else, adjusting myself to fit into the spaces others had created for me. But now I was living for me. I was building a life on my terms. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the water, I realized how far I had come. I had left behind the person I used to be, the person who thought her worth was measured by others' opinions. I had shed that skin, and I was finally fully myself. The road ahead wasn't perfect. I knew there would be challenges, setbacks, but I was no longer afraid of them. I wasn't afraid of standing alone anymore. I had found peace in this solitude, a peace that came from knowing I could stand on my own, from knowing that I didn't need anyone's approval to be who I was. I smiled, stepping away from the window. The future was waiting, but for the first time in years, I was ready to face it. It had been months since I left. Months since the moment I stepped away from the life I had built for Damon, for his approval, for his family's acceptance. I had walked away not out of anger, but out of necessity, out of the quiet realization that my dignity was worth more than any false love I had been clinging to. Tonight, as I sat by the window in my apartment, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The years of silence, the sacrifices, the moments I had swallowed my own voice for the sake of keeping peace. I had convinced myself that I had to be quiet to be loved, that if I just endured long enough, things would get better. But they didn't. The stillness of the room wrapped around me, comforting in its simplicity. The river outside glistened in the dim light, calm and steady. It was the same river that had been there when I first arrived in Savannah, and yet everything felt different now. Everything felt right. I picked up my phone, absently scrolling through the messages that had been left unanswered. The messages from Damon had stopped coming, but there was still one that lingered, the last one. The one he sent before I left. "Mom, it's just a joke. Don't be so dramatic. Come back." I used to read it over and over, each time feeling the sharp sting of betrayal, the pain of realizing how little I had meant to him. But now, as I stared at those words, they didn't hurt. They didn't have the power to wound me anymore. They were just words, empty, hollow. I closed the message and set my phone down on the table. It was funny, in a way, how something that had once torn me apart now felt like the closing of an old chapter. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to go back to fix what couldn't be fixed. I had spent so long trying to make things work with Damon, trying to convince myself that if I just gave a little more of myself, he would see my worth. But I was done with that. I was done waiting for validation from someone who could never give it to me. The truth was, I had never needed anyone's validation but my own. I had spent so many years looking outward, seeking approval, seeking love in places it was never meant to be. But now I was looking inward. I was the one who needed to see my worth. As I sat there letting the peace of the room wash over me, I realized something. Leaving wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something real, something that was entirely mine. I had spent so long living for everyone else. First for Frank, then for Damon, then for Leia and her family, but now I was living for me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a background character. I was the protagonist of my own story. I stood up, walking over to the small bookshelf I had filled with my favorite novels, the ones that had never made sense to Damon or his family, the ones that had been laughed at, discarded. I ran my fingers over their spines, feeling their weight, their importance. These books were more than just stories. They were symbols of who I was, who I had always been, but had never allowed myself to be fully. I smiled as I picked one up and opened it, the familiar scent of paper and ink filling my senses. I wasn't just moving on from the past. I was embracing it. I was taking every lesson, every painful memory, and weaving them into the person I had become. The past no longer defined me. It had shaped me, yes, but it no longer had the power to hold me back. I had taken back my voice, my dignity, my strength. I had taken back my life. As I sat back down, the weight of it all, the years of silence, the years of sacrifice, began to fall away. What was left was the quiet hum of peace, the realization that I had finally found my place in this world on my own terms. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to rescue me or to tell me I was worthy. I had always been worthy. And now, I was living as the woman I was meant to be. The river outside flowed steadily, a reminder that life continued, no matter what. And so would I.